I first, of course, want to thank you for your invitation, notwithstanding my being away and late. I couldn't imagine not being with you on this occasion. This occasion is quite special. It is the final conference of a project which was in fact initiated from Istanbul, actually. It's Said. Probably Katerina recalled that for all of you today. It is Said Azarbarli, Professor Said Azarbarli, who wrote to me. I think when was that actually? It was 7 or 8 years ago, probably. Saying that there was a great interest in not only in Bergson in the context of your university and your colleagues, and probably some of you are around the tables here, but also a very original interest in the very question of global Bergsonism and not only the question, Bergsonian problems, but the question I am going to try and deal with you and study with you this morning is the question is not only of your interest in Bergson here and there, but why is there a global interest in Bergson? How could Bergson be the name of global question in philosophy, not only in the beginning of the 20th century, but maybe today. And I think this is what I want to go back to this morning, is through the title I suggested, is not only to examine how Bergsonism went global at the beginning of the 20th century, but why it is and should be global today. And global meaning also world problem and world philosophy and world discussion, which is a problem. What is a world discussion? And in preparing this conference, this talk, I realized that there is a big debate actually today in the sociology of literature and philosophy on what is a global author. It's a question in French. There is a book who was just published. I want to tell you the title of the book. There is a book just published. It's interesting for me because I didn't know this book before preparing the talk. There is a book by Gisèle Sapiro, who is professor at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris, and she just wrote a book. I tell you the title. Qu'est-ce qu'un auteur mondial? Qu'est-ce qu'un auteur mondial? What is a world figure in literature? Un auteur mondial. How does someone become a world object of discussion? And I will go back to that because, of course, the answer by Gisèle Sapiro, who is a former student of Bourdieu sociology in Paris, she answers the question of what is a global figure in literature and in philosophy also. She doesn't discuss philosophy. She discusses only global figures in literature. A writer who becomes like Kafka, like Beckett, also like maybe other contemporary figures in literature. How do you become a global object of reading and debate? But the answer by Gisèle Sapiro, who is very interesting, of course, is sociological. It is through various institutions in the media, in the universities, in the global institutions that should become a world figure. And I'm still introducing my talk. I'm not inside the talk really, but just to tell you very casually the context. There is, for example, for Gisèle Sapiro, there is an institution that is a key social institution to make someone a global figure and it's the Nobel Prize in Literature. And of course, as you know, Bergson got the Nobel Prize in literature, because there is no Nobel Prize in philosophy. But there are two questions with Bergson's Nobel Prize, as opposed to what Giselle Sapiro says of the Nobel Prize in general to become a world figure, is that for Bergson it came after his global reputation. He got the Nobel Prize in 1927, and the global debate on Bergsonism was way before. And secondly, of course, he got the Nobel Prize in literature. And as you know, the Nobel Prize was a double-edged recognition. It also was the end of philosophical Bergsonism, because Bergson was then rated as a poet, as a writer, but as opposed to a philosopher. So this is why, in a way of a very casual introduction, this is why what I want to do today is to answer the question of my title, how can a philosophical problem concern the whole world? I don't want to answer it sociologically, not only sociologically. Of course, there is a sociological dimension, and there is a sociological dimension in all the contexts of Bergson's reception in every country, in every culture. You are going to discuss today and tomorrow questions about Islamic culture, Turkish context, and I will, of course, mention the amazing volumes of the Bergsoniana, the amazing conferences before, Bergson in Africa, Bergson in Finland, Bergson in Sweden, Bergson in North America, Bergson in Latin America, etc. So, of course, this context, these sociological contexts are crucial, and it's Bergson is a sort of ambassador to various diplomatic literature and philosophical and political diplomatic contexts. But my point is that you can't understand Bergson's global figure only in exterior dimensions, such as sociological dimensions or political, extra-philosophical dimensions. Maybe the other book I could mention is a very famous book when it was published in France. It's by François Azouvy. It's called La Gloire de Bergson, and he studies only Bergson's glory in a French context, how Bergson became the master of French philosophy before the First World War. But it's François Azouvy, who also teaches at the EHESS in social science, also envisages Bergson's glory in sociological terms. He even doesn't want to go into the books. So you have two ways to deal with the problem I want to deal today with. It's a sociological, historical perspective, and maybe Giuseppe Bianco, who is not here today, would do the same. He would study Bergson's global Bergsonism from a sociological point of view. I want to study with you today Bergson's global importance in philosophical terms, not in sociological terms. But we have to do sociology too. We have to do history of the context and what was at stake in every context in Asia, in Islam, and I will go back to it in a moment. So this was just a very casual introduction. Before going further, I want to thank not only Saïd Ozervali, but of course Katerina, the Société des Amis de Bergson. The way Katerina took the project with Saïd is, of course, a model for all of us. The way also it initiated a series of publications of the conferences. I'm sure this one will be published too. It will be an amazing volume. The next volume of the Bergsoniana that was just completed is Bergson in Africa. It was the conference in Cameroon with Émile Kenmonier. And of course, this conference today is a major step. It's not the final one, but of course it's ça boucle la boucle, it buckles the buckle, as we say in French, going back to the origin in Istanbul. So I'm very thankful. So what I want to study with you, and now I'm going to the heart of my talk. What I want to study with you is how Bergson's philosophical problems are global, become global, not only in their time, but today. And I want to do a sort of that was not what I projected initially, but I want to propose you to suggest a back and forth movement from the questions of today and the questions of Bergson. My point will be not only that we understand the past only from our present, but we understand Bergson's moment in philosophy, the moment in philosophy being the category I suggest in the history of philosophy, from the point of view of our moment in philosophy. But I do want to stress that Bergsonian problems are not only world problems, but are global problems in their time and in our time today. So I want to start with our time, go back to Bergson's time, and conclude with our time again, with the present moment again. I want to go back and forth in history. And if you allow me, I've been working on Bergson for a long time, of course, and I will. This talk will have some autobiographical content. I didn't premeditate that, but it was important. It's not going to be personal and psychological, but I want to do some intellectual history of our time, and you will understand why. So I want to start with the three moments of my talk in the 20 minutes. I think I still have, or 20 minutes. Okay. In the 3 moments of my talk in the 20 minutes I still have will be with an anecdote when I started my PhD on Bergson. The center moment will be on the way Bergsonism became global, and the philosophical problems concern the whole world in Bergson time. And I will conclude on why and how we should go back to Bergson as a global philosopher today. Let me start with an anecdote. When I started my PhD on Bergson, I don't even dare to tell you the date. Bergson wasn't studied anymore in France, in French universities. The only vital connections with Bergson were Deleuze, of course, Gilles Deleuze. And by the way, we just republished Deleuze's book on Bergson with Deleuze's ontology of Bergsonian texts. It's just, I don't know if you've seen it. It was just published in the PUF last week. I can show you the book. I recommend you to discover this book. It's brand new. It's Deleuze, texte choisi de Bergson, suivi de Le Bergsonisme. It's both Deleuze's book on Bergson and Deleuze's ontology of Bergsonian text, which was the support for Deleuze's commentary on Bergson. And the other figure was Merleau-Ponty, and Merleau-Ponty and Deleuze kept Bergson alive for students in philosophy, but Bergson wasn't studied anymore. But when I decided to do a PhD on Bergson, and I'm sorry to have this personal memory in this global conference, but global conferences are also about individuals everywhere, of course. If you're Bergsonian, you don't think that individuals don't matter, of course. when I decided to do my PhD on Bergson, I was just coming out of a conference on a very different subject, for which I was the secretary. I needed to. Do you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me well? Or okay. Is it okay? Okay. I was a young professor in philosophy, and I was asked, I needed some money, and I was asked to, I had given my first class on Bergson already, actually, because there was no one to teach Bergson at the École Normale. So my first class on Bergson was taught in '87, actually. It was a long time ago, almost 40 years ago. And then I was invited to be the secretary of a conference. And what was the theme of this conference? It was on cognitive science. And actually, it was the first conference in France and one of the first in the world which discussed very seriously what is now very famous and worldwide known under the concept of artificial intelligence. So it was the first conference on artificial intelligence in France. It's now published, of course, in Gallimard by Daniel Andler. It's called Introduction aux sciences cognitives. And I wrote 200 pages report on this conference. And so I wrote a few chapters on artificial intelligence in 1988. And I wanted to do a PhD on Bergson. And I went to the professor who was my PhD director, and I told him I want to do a PhD on Bergson's concept of intelligence. And the idea I had, and I think it's totally true today, and this is to tell you why Bergson is global today also, is that in Bergson, artificial intelligence is a pleonasm, as we say in rhetoric. It's to say twice the same thing. What is intelligence in Bergson? As you know, intelligence in the creative evolution, intelligence is the human faculty to fabricate device. Intelligence is technical. Intelligence is artificial as such. Natural intelligence in human beings is artificial because it is the way the human mind differs from the animal instinct, and the way intelligence differs from instinct is in fabricating devices, fabricating techniques, technical devices. How do you evolution? It's when you see the trace of a tool. You find an arrow, you find a stone carved, then you said some human being was there. Homo faber. It comes before Homo sapiens. One of the famous global phrases of Bergson, because I will insist in a moment on Bergson global inventions. Global phrases. There is élan vital, of course. There is Homo faber. And there is a third one, maybe, but I keep the third one for later in my talk, which is very important. But I can tell you now, it's supplément d'âme, an extra soul in the two sources. And there are a few others, of course. But Bergson coined global phrases, global images. And maybe a philosopher goes global, goes worldly through images, and Bergson had a theory for that, of course. So élan vital is an image. Homo faber is an image too. What defines mankind? Mankind is technical. So my intuition, to be a little ambitious, my idea in my PhD was to insist on Bergson's concept of artificial intelligence, not to understand AI today as such, but to understand the concept of intelligence in Bergson, Bergson's naturalization of knowledge through life. Intelligence is biological theory of knowledge, of course, in Bergson. Knowledge is not a theory of an abstract theory of transcendental conditions of knowledge. Epistemology has to be rooted in biology. As Bergson says in the preface of the Creative Evolution, theory of knowledge and theory of life have to go together. So I went to Jean-Claude Pariente, who was a great professor at this time, and he said, I want to do a PhD on artificial intelligence in Bergson. And he said, yes, okay, it's a great idea. It's a theory of intelligence, intrinsically artificial, and what do you do with this, and so forth. And of course, I think this was an effect of the 1988 conference in France on cognitive science and AI. And I will conclude this talk with telling you how Bergson is global today because also of artificial intelligence. And how do you make artificial intelligence human? Is it only, for Bergson, there's no question, actually. Our AI is human. Today you have some questions on, is AI going to replace the human beings? Is it going to be a machine? For Bergson, there's no question. AI is human. Why is it human? Because mankind is defined by technique. But this is not the only question about AI. And I will conclude with another question about AI, because with the word human, we mean something else. But the first point I want to make is that the anecdote is telling that Bergson was going to come back. I didn't know how, but Bergson was going to come back because life was going to come back. Because a biological and technical theory of knowledge was going to come back. We were in 1988. Some of you weren't born. Maybe Katerina wasn't born even. But maybe you were born, but okay. But life was going to come back as a global problem. And of course, what I discovered, now I come to the heart of my talk. When I started my PhD, of course, I totally forgot the origin of it. My PhD wasn't really on intelligence. And initially, I wanted to confront Bergson's theory of intelligence with the theory of cognitive science, with Merleau-Ponty, I wanted to do a global theory of confrontation and so forth. But that's not what I did. So what did I encounter, and how did it also, was it a way to understand how Bergson was global in his time? In his time. I'm now coming to the second part of the talk, which is going back to what we study together, that is Bergson in his time and in his world. Why was he so global in his time? Why were Bergsonian problems world problems in his time? And his time meaning, as you know, and this is important, mostly the time between 1903 and 1914. The global moment of Bergsonism, because Bergsonism is global, but the global question of Bergsonism didn't start in 1889 with the first book, although it was, of course, a revolution, as Senghor put it. So, like Suleiman Bashir Diagne always quotes the phrase by Léopold Senghor, saying the 89 revolution. There was a revolution in France in 89, but it wasn't in 1789, it was in 1889, and it was the essay by Bergson, according to Léopold Senghor in Senegal. But the global discussion on Bergsonism started in 1903 with the introduction to metaphysics, and in a way it ended with the beginning of the First World War, as we very often discussed with Katerina, and we did some thinking about the centennial of the First World War, and as the end of the world Bergsonism. But the project of global Bergsonism showed that it wasn't the end really, but the global discussion, the terms of the Bergsonian discussion were set between 1903 and 1914, with in the middle the publication of Creative Evolution in 1907. So what did we of course what did we discover together, and how that did Bergson how did Bergson phrase a philosophical problem that did concern the whole world? It is very simple to state. The Bergsonian problem was the critique of science and knowledge as artificial intelligence, as opposed to another way of knowledge, to another faculty of knowledge that he called intuition. And this distinction being grounded not only on a philosophical critique and distinction of space and time and space and duration, but going back from space and duration to their ground, their metaphysical foundation in life itself. In life itself, of course, Bergson went global when he said that knowledge was intellectual and scientific, and human knowledge was both derived from life and incapable to understand life. That intelligence was a product of life and also incapable to comprehend life, that we needed another faculty of knowledge, a faculty that Bergson from 1903 to 1914 called intuition, and that in 1907 he called he thought able to go back to the essence of life, which is not a mechanical process but an élan vital. So this is what made Bergson global, actually. What Bergson invented in a way is a critical problem, both scientific, metaphysical, that opened a space within science and philosophy, and space where everybody could understand a major alternative that immediately went viral, so to speak. It was vital and viral, and it was, and what the various conferences of the Global Bergsonism Project showed, all the volumes of the Bergsoniana attest, is that the quarrel of the Bergsonism quarrel, as we say in France, la querelle du Bergsonisme, spread over the whole world like a flame, because it was the quarrel between intuition and intelligence, between life and science, between élan vital and geometry and technique. And so it was a very central quarrel at a time where the machines were so powerful, where science wanted, and Katerina studied it, and it was interpreted as an internal critique of Western philosophy and an opening to other ways of thinking, of acting, and of course this was immediately it spread all over the world. So so how did it become a world problem? Again, this is where you have to be very careful, and I think the project that you initiated, Said, and that together with Katerina and so many friends around the world, you organized. The problem cannot be summed up this way exactly. What I retain from the project is actually three things. We have three results. The first one is, of course, also sociological, in a sense that meets with Gisèle Sapiro and other writers, such as a very famous book too, which is called The World Republic of Letters by Pascal Casanova. There is a world community of discussion. And of course, what the Global Bergsonism project told us is that this spreading of the Bergsonian distinctions, the Bergsonian critique all over the world, were not only an effect of imitation, an effect of, but it's a sort of revelation of various institutional contexts, very different, but which all were diffraction tools to Bergson's distinction. The way Bergson was received, was transferred, was accommodated, was interpreted in all this context is fascinating. And it's sort of a global confrontation with modernity, with global problems, through various cultural contexts. And so Global Bergsonism is a cultural history project in the first dimension. And this is what your conference in Istanbul will be contributing to. It's fundamental. But it's not the only point, of course. The second point is that what I find from every conference on Africa, Finland, Asia, of course, Japan, but not only Japan. There is also a Bergsonian reception in Korea, in China, and you will study in Iran, I gather from the program and other places. Why is sociology not enough? It's because, first of all, the Bergsonian goes global. Bergson goes global not only through public debate, the media of the time, the press, and so forth. He goes global through individual readings. If you take, of course, Bashir Diane's famous book, Suleiman Bashir Diane, book called Post-Colonial Bergson, what do you find in that book? Of course, if you take Gisèle Sapiro's book, she says that the idea of a world philosophy isn't political enough. In fact, the cultural history dimension should be more political, she argues. And for example, the example she takes is that you have to take into account the colonial and post-colonial history. If you want to confront the Western philosophy and African philosophy, for example, she will say, you have to take into account political history, not only cultural history. And so her sociology is also political, and she probably would criticize the Global Bergsonism project for not being political enough. So how can you study Bergson's reception in Africa without the colonial question? And then comes Bashir's book, our friend Bashir. And what do you find in Post-Colonial Bergson by Suleiman Bashir Diagne? You don't find, of course, the background is political history, but of course, what you find are two individual figures. The founder of modern Senegal and the founder of modern Pakistan. Two figures, two individual readers of Bergson, confronting Bergson from their individual questions. Of course, they were questioning the behind the opposition between science and intuition, there was the opposition between the West and the traditional cultures. And for example, Senghor was widely criticized because he said the West, science is Western and intuition is African. As he said, the reason is Greek and the intuition is nigger, as Senghor very controversially said. La raison est grecque et l'intuition est nègre. But Bashir shows very well that beyond these colonial controversies, political controversies, and it's the same in Pakistan, you have individual confrontations. Senghor's reading of Bergson is very peculiar. It's Senghor's thought as an individual thought. So the way philosophy goes global is through individual readers. And what's very fascinating to me, and we will have to gather that probably in a collective book, is that if you take the volumes of the Bergsoniana series directed by Katerina and many friends, you will find in every place, in Africa, in Japan, of course, with Nishida, Tanabe, and other figures, in North America, of course, with William James and many others, in Latin America and in Brazil, for example, with many very important philosophers, Bento Prado, Frontin Leopoldo, and so many others. Philosophy goes global through individual controversies, through individual theses. You don't want to do only sociology of culture and political history. You want to enter the individual relational confrontations. So you should never dilute the global Bergsonism project into global cultural history. In fact, and it's not even the confrontation between, let's say, Buddhism and Western philosophy. This has its interest, of course. That's the important thing. The most important thing is Nishida's reading of Bergson about, for example, the question of élan vital and death and intuition. Nishida is not Bergsonian. His intuition is an intuition of death and void and nothingness, which is impossible in Bergson. But it's also impossible without Bergson, because Bergson gives Nishida a way to affirm the metaphysical intuition as such, even though Nishida's intuition is an intuition of nothingness, and not of, whereas in Bergson, of course, nothingness is a fiction of the intellectual mind. Nothingness is actually artificial intelligence at heart. So I want to be very quick, sir. The last point I want to say, and I want to be to insist on that, you cannot understand global Bergsonism without global history, without individual confrontations, and without Bergson's work itself. The writing of Bergson. What makes Bergson global is Bergson's work. That's very simple. And within this work, and for better and for worse, and I was last week on the conference on Peggy and Bergson on images, it's the very acute writing of major distinctions in his books, and of course the phrasing of problems through images like élan vital, again, homo faber, duration and space, intuition, and also the closed and open society, closed and open religion, and the way in his last book in 1932, global Bergsonism was over. In a way, it was too late. But in 1932, in his major book for us today, I will say the two sources of morality and religion, he coins again major formulas. People remember the last formula of the book. The universe is a machine to produce gods. Artificial intelligence, maybe again, artificial producing of gods. And the supplément d'âme, extra soul, supplément d'âme. Our enlarged body needs an extra soul, supplément d'âme, which in France, for example, you open the radio, and if you want to criticize something, you say it's only an extra soul, it's a supplément d'âme. It's a very common phrase in France, like élan vital. So if you want to understand global Bergsonism and how it went worldwide, you have to do some sociology, some philosophy, of course. And in philosophy, you have to go back to Bergson's writing. Why did he have to coin images? Why did he have to solve this and that problem? And now I want to conclude. I want to go back to our problem. Why is Bergson global today? In my view, it is because, as I felt without knowing it in 1988, we are going back to the global problem of life through not only the coming back of vital techniques, just like neurology, neuroscience, cognitive science, or artificial intelligence, but we are going back to major life and death alternatives. And this is why Bergson's life philosophy, vitalism, was global in 20th century, but beginning of 20th century. This is why also it disappeared at some point, but this is why it is coming back today. And what I want to conclude with is the last surprise in my own Bergson's reading. When I started with Bergson, I started from artificial intelligence, as I told you. Then I went into the global reading of Bergson, and there is one book that I studied less than the others. Just as Deleuze doesn't study it, Merleau-Ponty doesn't study it. No one among the modern Bergsonians, the people wanting to keep Bergson alive, studied it, and it is the two sources. The question of religion, the question of the last book, Bergson's last book. And I think this book is vital for us today because what Bergson says is another definition of what is human and what is not human. What is human? What is human is, of course, intelligence. Okay. But unfortunately, this is not only what is human. What is human is actually more political than intellectual in the two sources. What is human is the natural instinct to survive, which in a context of finite, élan vital, finite mankind, leads to survival against the others, leads to war. Actually, the too late discovery of 1932 between the two world wars of the last century, and we are living another world war very different today. What is human is closed society and war. And the tragedy of artificial intelligence, of technique, is not an epistemological tragedy. If someone wants to tell you, okay, artificial intelligence is dangerous as such, it is dehumanizing, but it is not dehumanizing, it is human. And it is human as an incredible tool. And Bergson predicted that intelligence was infinite, that intelligence was very powerful. Language is a powerful tool. Language is already artificial intelligence as such. With language, you analyze the whole world, and artificial intelligence is only another degree of language mastering of the world, and calculus. And Bergson, of course, is a major philosopher of calculus. But the question is not the power of artificial intelligence or other machines as such. The question is that it is used for war. So the question that I didn't anticipate is not only an epistemological question. It led me to life and vitalism in Bergson and today. But now the question is, how do you make artificial intelligence and other vital tools human in the sense of not only epistemologically human, not only in terms of human domination and war, but also in the sense, in the moral sense of humanity, in the open sense of humanity. To a finality, an end, a goal that is not war but peace, that is not domination but openness, and that is an incredible tool to relieve mankind from its wars and not to aggravate them. And you know Bergson's answer. And of course, that was not global. That's a little bit too late. Even in Bashir's book, you can understand that the founders of Pakistan and Senegal, they haven't really read the two sources. Even in France, Jean Kelevich and others, and even Levinas, they haven't read the two sources very closely, really. So Bergson was global, but not all Bergson was global. And now we have to make the closed and the open distinction global today, on a vital background, a mortal background. And the question for me is, can you go open, can you go global today within humanity? Or do you need Bergson's transcendence of humanity? For Bergson to be global, to attain the world, you have to go beyond mankind, because mankind is not world dimension. Mankind is within the world, it's closed and military. But if you want to attain the world for Bergson, you have to go beyond mankind. So the question is, how can a philosophical problem concern the whole world? I think we have to, today to be very clear. We need global philosophical problems, because the world is now a reality. It's a very dangerous reality. It's the power of war aggravated by the powers of techniques, and we don't have a philosophical problem to understand what we are living today. We don't have it. So where will we find it? We will find it in Bergson, in a way, with distinctions, but not only the intuition and intelligence, rationalism and instinct, etc., etc. The global question of the 20th century, the global question of the 21st century is the question of the closed and the open life for humanity, and to attain it from within humanity and not only beyond humanity. And for that, you have to start with the problems we face, the way we need the global humanity to solve global problems such as climate, health, and democracy, which for Bergson was the ultimate problem. You know, he said that democracy was the major fact of the 20th century. And so I think we need a new global Bergsonism. And so I will end up by thanking you for the global Bergsonism project that you created. But now we need another global Bergsonism for today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frédéric. Can you hear me? Can you still hear me? Okay. Now it's been an amazing talk, very rich, and which went really to the core of the problems of today's conference, I think, both for the overall methodology central questions. There are already some questions. I also have some, but I leave Tobias Endres the first question, of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a fascinating talk. I was not aware that already in 1988 you thought about the concept of intelligence in terms of artificial intelligence, so way ahead of time. I agree more or less with everything that you concluded from Bergson's concept, especially that language, for instance, is already artificial and that is something natural. I have a question rather regarding the history of philosophy that was important for the second part of your talk. And it concerns the original Bergsonism quarrel as you presented it. You presented it basically as the hypothesis that intelligence cannot grasp life. Do you understand me? So do we not need to conclude that ultimately Bergson is quite an orthodox Kantian? I know this is quite a provocative question, but it was, I just want to recall that, first Kant, who said that there will never be a Newton of the blade of grass, from the Critique of Judgment, this famous passage. And I think we can also relate this, what Bergson thinks about life and nature, because starting off from the third critique, we can actually think of nature as being technomorphic. So we have to understand it as if it was enabling technology from itself. So this is totally in line with everything that Bergson would say about intelligence in relation to what is human and what is natural. So I'll stop here. Some thoughts on that.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. This is a very, very nice and interesting and important question, and very, very finely phrased. I have two answers that come to my mind. First, of course, Bergson is a very precise reader of Kant, and not only a simplistic critic as too many readers thought. In fact, Bergson's concept of intelligence is a naturalization of Kant's concept of Verstand, of entendement, of understanding. And so Bergson thought that Kant's philosophy was correct, but that was a philosophy that wasn't going to criticize pure reason from the standpoint of a priori conditions of knowledge, but from biological conditions of knowledge. So that made all the difference, because if you understand that science is biologically grounded and not transcendentally grounded, then you can go beyond it through intuition, which goes beyond understanding to understand the movement of life, the creation of life, and how life resists understanding and intellectual knowledge. And we need both knowledges. So that for Bergson, of course, Kant's intuition in the third critique, and that's the second part of my answer, you are totally right. The third critique is in the Bergsonian way. Of course, it completes the intellectual critique, and it completes the understanding of the living beings. You don't have only physics and mathematics, but you need also finality and judgment and reflective judgment. But for Bergson, Kant had to build the third critique because of the mistakes of the first one. If Kant had realized from the outset that our scientific understanding was grounded on biological limits of mankind, then of course he would have done he would have been Bergsonian, and he would have said, okay, you have to complete science with intuition. And so the Kant's first and third critique are, for Bergson, the sign of his own dualism. So you're totally right that Bergson would probably say that the third critique was imperfect compensation of the mistakes of the first one, and that you had to criticize pure reason from another standpoint, which is biological. But of course, this is a very interesting and important question. And I think Bergson did take Kant very seriously, and that would be true also for open society and democracy, of course.
Thank you.
More questions?
First, thank you so much for this really interesting talk. I have 2 points. The first point concerns the relationship between, or how we can make a difference or a distinction between artificial intelligence when we are referring to human language and when we are referring to the machine use of language. Maybe I need to cite here Chomsky, the linguist and the philosopher, who said that there is no artificial intelligence. It's actually a great artificial plagiarism, because there is no intelligence in there. It is plagiarism, not intelligence.
Plagiarism.
So, Chomsky says that there is no artificial intelligence. All the generative AI we have here are artificial plagiarism. And I think kind of agree with him in a certain point that particularly, I'm not generalizing when I'm talking about generative AI and specifically large language models, like the ones we have, ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Claude, and all the other stuff. I conducted a study studying how these large language models treat or handle the translation of cultural elements in figurative language. The results show that it really depends on the feeding, the training of those large language models. When those models are trained on certain data, where, for example, like proverbs, idioms that are commonly used, the machines provide excellent results in the translation. And here, the languages I'm using is worse to English, so from Turkish, French into English. Something else, just when you get a little bit culturally subjective, the machines fail. So the human use of that artificial intelligence, which we call, as we actually call it, language is an artificial intelligence itself. The human use is totally different from the machine use. Humans have something different than the machine we train. Did I get my point here?
Yeah.
The machine is dependent on that human artificial intelligence, which we call language. And there are things that really surprise us every time we use language. And here I want to go back to your first point when you said how one can be an auteur global. This is a really beautiful, and as a professional translator, I can say from practical experience that there are some authors who can easily turn global because their works successfully survive translation. They survive translation culturally, linguistically, and I would say humanly. But there are some authors who cannot go global because their works are too linguistically specific. Bergson has 2 points. The problems he addresses are both timeless and global in themselves. So we'll discuss his problems, the problems he addresses in a global or on a global scale. The second thing is language. He is creative, but for example, the élan, how do you translate that? We all of us use in English, the vital impetus. We have certain translations, but we always go back to the French term decoy because it is it is a capsule, a cultural capsule and a philosophical capsule that need to be expressed in French to be able to express its meaning. So I guess deglobalize certain concepts by his work, while people globalized his work. Well, I guess that's it. What to get into.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. These were great questions and great comments on what I suggested. Thank you very much. I'm very struck by what you said. First, maybe I should apologize because, of course, in the it wasn't the central topic of my talk, but in the building of a global author, translation is, of course, a major tool and a major category to be put through. Of course, the question of translation, and what it brings and what it loses and what it's very crucial to the building of transnational authorship and discussion. So thanks for bringing back translation first. It was your second point, so to speak, but it was very important. And the translatability of Bergson is a very interesting question. The second point is, of course, crucial too. It's the relationship, if I understand well, between a language and artificial intelligence and the new generative language. As you know, to me, current artificial intelligence is actually a challenge to Bergson. What does Bergson say? Bergson says that intelligence and language, as such, can be very productive. It can invent new things in a way, but it will not be creative. It distinguishes between production and creation. Why is that? Because it says in creative evolution that intelligence always rearranges previous knowledge. So you can do a very fine intellectual history. For example, you bring together the whole philosophy, you bring together all the results of mankind, you do fine music with all the music before, you do fine science with all the science before, you do fine philosophy with all the philosophy before. You do great machines with all the machines before. But to have creation, you have to have something radically new. Not only rearrangement, as it puts it, of the previous knowledge of previous reality, but something radically new. So it distinguishes between fabrication and creation. And the question I think you ask is artificial intelligence with its infinite power, with data, with language in a new way, is it still in this distinction? Is it only fabricating pieces? For example, if I asked ChatGPT to write my paper today, what paper will you have had? I mean, maybe the same. I don't know. Maybe better, much better. I should have asked ChatGPT to write my paper. I would have given ChatGPT all my papers on Bergson, and I would say, well, now I'm invited in Istanbul. I'm supposed to write this paper. Can you write it for me? And maybe you would have had a great paper. I don't know. But for Bergson, it would have been a production, but not a creativity, because what I try to do with all my, it's to do something new, at least for me. I mean, something really challenging and new. And maybe this distinction by Bergson is still relevant to distinguish between fabricating with all the previous knowledge, even the infinite data that we give to the machine, on the one hand, and creating something radically new. This is also the distinction between the talent and the genius. Bergson distinguishes between the talent. You can have a very talented composer, but to be Mozart, you have to, it's something else. Okay. Is it still relevant at the time of generative AI and so forth? The word generative is not very Bergsonian, of course. It is Bergsonian and it is not Bergsonian, because generative is it production or creation? So I think you ask a very interesting question. If we are Bergsonian, we would like to dwell on it and say, well, but to me, again, and I go back to the end of my talk. To me, the most important question is not epistemological. It is more, do we use artificial intelligence for war or for peace? Do we use it for closed or for open society? Do you use it to produce hate or to produce discussion? So now that's the big question. And maybe mankind is at stake, but not only in terms of technical capabilities, but in terms of moral orientation. Thank you again. Very interesting questions.
Thank you very much, Frédéric, for this answer. And Saito Zarvani has also a question for you.
Thank you so much for this very important talk, Frédéric. And I liked your new description for our community, like the Bergsonian Republic of Letters. This gave us a class, really, and it is very motivating. Thank you. I mean, it is very important to be aware to kind of deconstruct artificial intelligence by saying that in Bergsonian sense that intelligence, natural intelligence is actually artificial. That is quite helpful to understand, I mean, the relation between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. Secondly, in Bergsonian understanding to come from this scientific machinery understanding to philosophy of life, that after some kind of discussions, it becomes like philosophy of biology. Instead of that, what you were paying attention about power of wars or wars for power, if we focus on philosophy of living instead of philosophy of life, would it be also more kind of like solving questions for our future, for our rights, for our democracy?
The answer is yes. It's very interesting. Thank you for your comments first, and the phrase Bergsonian Republic of Letters. That's very interesting. That's in fact what we try to build in a way. Yeah, of course. And the second point, of course, philosophy of living as wider and more precise than a philosophy of life. That's I think it's very important for many reasons, and it's also because it shows us that philosophy is not only talking about life; it is part of life. And philosophy of living is also, of course, an ethical and practical philosophy. And you know, Bergson always concludes his works on saying that by doing philosophy, you change life in a way. So of course, philosophy of living is central. What I would add is, of course, philosophy of living against dying, against the contrary of life. And life is not an absolute reality, guaranteed, warranted absolute reality. It has to always, it has a contrary. And you have duration and space. You have memory and habits. You have intuition and intelligence, and you have the open and the closed. So philosophy of living is also not a dialectic. I will never use the word dialectics, but it's divided. It's a tension. It's not a given. It's a tension. So that's what's important. That's what I hear, of course, in the living as Data would put it, maybe as surviving too, but surviving not only as not dying, but surviving as over-living, you know, more than living. Living and more than living, reviving, as I put it too in my own words. Reliving.
Thank you for your talk. It was really inspiring. So my question can be linked to the previous questions, maybe in some sense. You mentioned that naturalistic, for Bergson, what intelligence does is that naturalization of knowledge through life. So can we say that AI cannot, artificial intelligence cannot be like human intelligence because it cannot naturalize knowledge through life by using intuition, or it is not the case? So, and by this question, I was wondering what is the role of intuition for Bergson, and how does it differentiate human intelligence from artificial intelligence?
Thank you. That's also a very good question. I think actually, wait, I have to put back I have to focus on a different part of the screen to see you better. Yes, that's a very good question. I think both for Bergson, both intelligence and intuition are biological, of course. They're both natural in a way. So naturalizing means not making intelligence and knowledge an empire in an empire, as Spinoza puts it, but Bergson reverses the Spinoza phrase. Of course, knowledge is not an empire in the empire of life. Knowledge is within life. But both intelligence and intuition are living faculties in a way. But for Bergson, what intuition does is, when he puts it positively, it's putting us inside the experience that we are living. And putting us inside is, of course, complicated because to describe it, to talk about it, you have to be outside. So intuition is mostly what Merleau-Ponty would have called a pre-reflexive experience of something, but which through language can become expressed, but it has to, our knowledge is a mix of intuition and intelligence. But when I find Bergson most relevant for us today, maybe is when in the Philosophical Intuition, the 1911 paper in Bologna, Bergson defined intuition not only by the experience of something from the inside, but as a surprise and a question at the same time, and a refusal. For example, when you say movement is a geometrical problem, the Zeno paradox, Bergson's intuition is to say, no, it cannot be only that. It's a refusal. And why is that? Because when I move my arm, I'm not going from A to B to C to D to E to F. I'm going from A to F. So I move my arm, it's a movement. And then comes Zeno and he says, well, how did this movement happen? And so he will try to do a mathematical description of my movement, but then I would say, no, my movement was not only an adding of little movements, it was a movement. It was a gesture. It had a meaning. But to understand that meaning, you have to do some philosophy, and it's contradictory with the meaning itself. But then the very first step is intuition as a surprise and a refusal based on an experience. And for Bergson, you don't want to give up on these experiences. You have to stand firm on vital experiences. And of course, it's very dangerous because on the name of Bergson, for the sake of Bergson, you have so many fake intuitions and so many people over the world pretending to have intuitions. So you have a sort of epidemics of intuition, and it's very, that's why Bergson tells his disciples to confirm intuition by science. You have to go back and forth. So if you want to prove that movement is simple, you have to write the essay, okay? You just don't, saying my movement is pure is not enough. So you will have the prophets, the false prophets of Bergsonism. Beware of them. They will tell you, I have an intuition. Okay, says Bergson, you have an intuition? Just prove it. And that's why he wrote books. Otherwise, he would just have said, I have an intuition. But so there is a sort of, again, there is a sort of complementarity of intelligence and intuition in Bergson's books. So that is why Bergsonism was so polemical, because people claim to have intuitions all over the world.
Thank you very much for this new dose of new fix of thoughts, and I'm really grateful for all this exchange, for all this debate, and thank you very much for your time with us. We are we're going to have a little break before we go ahead with Alessandro Taverniti's presentation of the bibliography.
I'm sorry to have to leave you. I think I will try to connect at some other points of today's conference. I will do my best, but I want to thank you so very much. It was very important to me, and as you felt, I tried to put not only some general but also some personal comments and discussion. And thank you for the great questions and discussion. And have a great conference in Turkey.
Thank you.
But Frédéric, if you don't come to Istanbul, Bergson is more than big global. You need to come.
That's a deal. I will come, of course.
Okay.
I should have been today. I will come another day. Okay. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so very much. Have a good conference. Merci beaucoup.